Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revolution Report. My name is Slava, and I really hope that you can see and hear me good. So please let me know in the comments and the chat if you can hear me good. This is my first time on the channel, and I'm really excited to be here. Don't worry, this is not a coup, and I'm not taking over the Revolution Report. Our editor-in-chief, Donald Corder, will be here next week and in the following weeks. I'm just helping out. So please let me know in the chat if there's any questions, if you would like me to answer, and I'll definitely address them. So today we will be talking about, am I really a Ukrainian? Also, I'm going to reply to some of the Twitter comments. I was recently accused of being a Russian troll, Kremlin's agent, and stuff like that. I will answer how come I'm not a nationalist, given that I grew up in Galicia. Also, how I became a Marxist. I'll give you some newest updates from Ukraine on this mobilization bill that was just passed today. Also, we'll talk a little about American Congress and the new funding bill they're trying to approve. And also, in the end, I'll touch a little on where I see this conflict in Ukraine going in the future. So let's start now with, am I really a Ukrainian? Lots of people, when they see my posts on Twitter, which my nickname on Twitter is Ukrainian Socialist, they say, how can you be a Ukrainian if you're on the Russian side? You must be Russian just pretending to be a Ukrainian. And this all started with me reposting a tweet from Western Marx. A couple days ago, they posted that Russian officials' investigative team has found connections between the Ukrainian SBU and the terrorists that attacked the Crocus City Hall. So I replied to that, that why I'm not surprised. And I added that it hurts me so much to understand that my home country, Ukraine, has turned into a terrorist state. And my adopted country, I live in the United States right now, is the sponsor of terrorism. And of course, I wasn't talking just about Crocus City Hall. Obviously, the investigation is still going on. We can't come to any conclusions right now. But just in general, I was talking about other terrorist acts that Ukrainians did admit in committing, like killing the journalist Vladlen Tatarsky or Daria Dugina and others. So that was like my message. And of course, I got attacked by many of the people saying I cannot be possibly Ukrainian. They started telling me, you should say this test word. Just you make sure you say Palenitsa, because if you can't pronounce it, that means you're Russian. Apparently, I don't know why, for some reasons, the languages are so similar, Ukrainian and Russian, but for some reason, Russian-speaking people can't pronounce certain words without training, of course. Well, I recorded a video speaking in Ukrainian language, but even that wasn't enough. I was still called Biden-loving socialist. People said I have to move to Russia or to China or DPRK. Well, I'm going to answer now why I don't want to move anywhere. I'm good where I am. And in China, in DPRK, they already have some version of socialism. They're working on it, right? So if I'm a socialist, if I'm a Marxist, and I want to build a society based on socialism, what's the purpose? What's the reason for me to move to any of those countries? I'm going to stay here and I'm going to be part of the movement and build socialism where I live. So moving to Russia also doesn't make any sense because I'm not Russian, I'm Ukrainian. So I would like to see socialism also built in Ukraine, my home country. So this reminds me a lot about the same kind of accusations that people say, oh, you must be Russian, not Ukrainian. Otherwise you would be a Banderite. Same way the Zionists are telling other Jews, they're saying, oh, you must be not a real Jew, otherwise you would be a Zionist. And we all know there's a ton of Jewish people who are opposing what the state of Israel is doing. So just the same way they're doing that, I'm a Ukrainian who disagrees with what Ukrainian government is doing, what they have been doing in the past and right now. Therefore, I'm going to speak out and I'm not going to shy away from it. So let me talk a little about where I'm from, right? So I'm from Ivano-Frankovsk region, which is southwest of Ukraine. It's close to Romania and Poland. It's a completely Ukrainian-speaking territory. I was born when Ukraine still didn't exist. It was Soviet Union. So in some part, these people are correct. I am not Ukrainian. I'm Soviet. I was born in USSR. There's many songs, famous Russian songs called "Born in USSR." So I'm one of those people who still um, caught a little glimpse of Soviet Union. Of course, I was growing up during 90s, and that's when Ukraine was starting to be, capitalist, free, independent capitalist state. So as I was growing up, some people we will ask, how come they haven't been able to convince you to be one of the nationalists? And that's an interesting question. When I was a teenager, you know how all teenagers go through certain, tough times in their life, right? I became a Jehovah's Witness. So I got into religion. And Jehovah's Witnesses are such an interesting religion. They are internationalists. So they teach to love everyone in the world, to not be nationalistic and just stand for your own. They basically say we're all equal, kind of like what socialism teaches, right? Equality. Therefore, as Jehovah's Witness, I learned how to love and accept everyone for who they are. I remember going to France for international convention and meeting all of these people from around the world, seeing them all, seeing that they're just as us, they're the same. And therefore, during my teenage years, and that's when, the consciousness is building, that's when your worldview is building, you're kind of forming your opinions about everything that's happening in the world, right? During your teenage years. So I was lucky to become religious at that point. So from the age of 12, I became Jehovah's Witness. I was really involved. I was preaching, going door to door. For 10 years, I was Jehovah's Witness. And that's probably what prevented me from becoming like nationalist, even though the school I was going to was highly patriotic. Like we had to sing national anthem, do like Pledge of Allegiance, but the Ukrainian version of it, and we were taught all these nationalistic slogans, like Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. We had to learn all the nationalist songs. I remember reciting like poems of this famous Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko and others, Ivan Franko, for example. That's the poet that my state is named after, Ivano-Frankovsk. But Shevchenko, he's interesting because he was writing, and this is, mind you, 19th century, so many years ago, he was writing about haterism towards Russian. And I remember, learning those poems didn't do well for me because, I didn't understand why, like, why such haterism. I remember one of the poems it was funny. He was saying, if you look from far away at the Russian person, you may think it's a human being, but then when you look closer, you realize it's not. And it's such a weird and awkward poem. Why would you teach that to children in elementary school? With one reason, right? To hate Russians. So because I was religious, it didn't impact it. It didn't leave such an impact on me. But on all of my classmates, people I grew up with, definitely it did leave an impact. And we can see it right now. There's armies of people who are like trolling everyone and saying that being a Bandera follower is a correct thing. So it's just such a um, I don't like to see that happening in my home country. I don't like to see that Bandera, who people didn't speak much of him in 90s, but then in the beginning of 2000s, unfortunately, many people started bringing back those so-called heroes, and the history books started, being rewritten. So every year we would get, yeah, Jenny is saying thanks CIA for sure. So true. The CIA spent so much money and so much efforts. I mean, first of all, they were doing it still when the Soviet Union existed. So they were sponsoring all these underground nationalist groups. But then as soon as the Soviet Union broke up, they officially started, bringing all this stuff back. And I remember that the Ukrainian diasporas from United States, from Canada, started coming back to Ukraine and forming these official institutes of Ukrainian nationalism. So, like in 1991, in the city of Lviv or Lvov, the Congress of Ukrainian Nationalists was formed. And that Congress was behind all of the different programs for kids, summer camps where they would train these future soldiers to fight the Russians. Fortunately, I avoided. I didn't go to any of those camps, and that's probably why I didn't become a nationalist, and eventually I did become a Marxist. So I became a Marxist after I moved to the United States. I moved here when I was 21. I was still a Jehovah's Witness, but then after like about a year being here, being a new immigrant, it was not easy, and everyone who went through this knows it's kind of hard. Um, Good thing I didn't end up in the middle of Ukrainian diaspora here, because if I did, I would probably uh, become a nationalist after moving in United States. But I was trying to stay away from Ukrainian diaspora, not because of any political reasons, because well, first of all, I was still Jehovah's Witness, and we had no right to have anything to do with politics. That's prohibited. They can't even speak of politics. For another reason is I wanted to learn English. I wanted to assimilate. I wanted to be part of this community, and I knew some people who were part of the diaspora, and they were here for like 30, 40, 50 years, and they didn't speak English. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to be one of those people. So I have to stay away from the Ukrainian community, and I have to try learning English. And I'm glad I did, because um, first of all, I left Jehovah's Witnesses. This is about 10 years ago. And I got married, and I got married with a Marxist. I didn't know he's a Marxist. So this was a surprise. I mean, of course, we talked a lot about religion. That's how I was able to leave Jehovah's Witnesses, because I had these debates about religion with my now husband, right? And first, we were talking only about religion. And then after that was done, I left Jehovah's Witnesses. Then he started slowly talking me into Marxism. Of course, he avoided things like communism and stuff like that, because I'm coming from post-Soviet country. But little by little, my understanding of politics, like I started catching up with politics after being religious for so many years. And I was really interested in Ukrainian politics, of course. This was about around 2013, 2014, when the revolution was happening in Ukraine, Maidan. And my husband started explaining to me that, look, this from a first glance, it looks like just organic uprising. But if you look closer, you'll see all of these different, signs that tell us this is a color revolution. So together we were investigating, looking into, and we realized that it is indeed a color revolution, just one of many, and it's a coup orchestrated by the fascists in Ukraine. It was scary to witness how these far-right militias were marching in Kiev and other cities with torches, and they, of course, they brought up all of those portraits of Bandera, swastika symbols, and all kinds of things. When I saw that footage happening in Ukraine, I was shocked. And then after that, when I saw that Ukrainian government went with war, they went after Donbass people, the residents of Donbass, who like, wait a minute, we don't want to be part of this. Give us some sort of an autonomy, like Crimea had autonomy. Why don't you give us autonomy? So when Ukrainian government said no and announced the beginning of anti-terrorist operation, so they basically called those people of Donbass terrorists. They said, "We there's no place for terrorism in Ukraine, and we have to get rid of you." So they started bombing Donbass, and throughout all those 8 years, we were witnessing, how things are unraveling, and how with every single day that conflict was getting worse and worse. So witnessing all of that kind of brought me the realization that this is not what I want to support. I'm not going to support United States imperialism because Ukraine is just a puppet. It's just a puppet regime. We know who is behind all of that. And little by little, I realized that the only solution, the only answer for all of this is Marxism, is socialism. So I started learning more about it, and that's how I became a Marxist. If you have any questions for me, let me know in the comment section, in the chat. Let me just take a look what's happening here. I see we have some troll here. Oh, I remember you. You were commenting on my Twitter. Someone who knows the full context. Well, I also know a full context. As a Ukrainian, as I mentioned earlier, I was watching what was happening in Ukraine for the past decade, right? The past 10 years. And I saw it all from both sides, right? I was reading Ukrainian news. I was also looking at Russian news. Contrary to many other Ukrainians I know who would only be listening to the Ukrainian side. Therefore, they always got one-sided story. They would like ban everything. Remember Zelensky, he banned everything that was coming from Russia. They would call it propaganda. But if you don't want to, if you're promoting one-sided story, that means you're the one who's spreading propaganda, because open-minded people are looking on both sides and then making their conclusion. That's the basic elements of dialectical materialism. You have to learn both sides and see how things are developing, and only then you will be able to come up to a conclusion, to make your decision. But that's not what Ukrainians have been doing. They've been banning everything Russian, and they're trying to do decommunization of Ukraine. So funny. So now let me touch a little on what's happening right now in Ukraine. I'm sure you have heard that today a new bill was passed by Ukrainian parliament. So it's called Verkhovna Rada, which is like equivalent of parliament. And just yesterday, they had another meeting where there was like 4,000 edits to this new bill. And of course, most of them were dismissed. Only like a few people have showed up to parliament yesterday to vote on those amendments. But today, when the bill was about to be passed, the full house was there. Everybody showed up, of course. And so they did pass it overwhelmingly, like majority. I think it was one deputy who voted no, against, and a few abstained. But majority voted for passing this new bill, and it's horrific. It's crazy. So many Ukrainians who are like pro-Ukraine, who are nationalists, don't even like it. You can just imagine what I think about it. So let me just bring a few of those. So first of all, mobilization age is lowered now to 25. So there was lots of talks about lowering the age of conscripts, and unfortunately they did lower it. Now it's official. Men that are 25 and up will be drafted, and they're hoping to draft like 500,000 young men. For those who are already at the front, so those who are fighting right now, they're soldiers, unfortunately, they can't go home, so they can't have a break. But the proposal was to give them opportunity for demobilization. So, like, get a break, go home, see their family. Unfortunately, right now, that's out of the window. So, people, can you just imagine? People are at the front lines for 2 years and they can't take a break. Even though personally, I think that most of those people who started early are probably either killed or wounded, unfortunately, because that's reality of the war. So, but still, you would think that anyone needs a break, right? Even soldiers. But no, they told them you can't have it. So I assume the morale of the army is going to go down for sure. Another thing is that everyone has to update their personal data in the military office. So I think they gave them like 60 days, 2 months to update all their information. And now every man has to carry their military registration document. So, like, for example, up until now, students, they didn't have to have any other documents except like their student ID, right? If they get stopped, um, they can just show their student ID. That was enough. Not anymore. Now, besides that, you have to also carry your military registration. And also, people who are like avoidance, who are trying to escape mobilization, they will have their driver's privileges removed. They won't be able to drive freely. So they're really trying to clamp down on privileges that people have. And consular services. So people in outside of the country, so like people who live in the United States, in among the diasporas, they have to register with for military, and they don't have to go to Ukraine for that. So Ukraine is one of these testing grounds for everything digital. So America and and some Europe, they're still like doing everything paper, like actual paperwork. But in Ukraine, they rolled out digital ID. So they have every Ukrainian has an app right now. It's called Dia, which translates as action. And on that app, they have everything. They have their social security, they have their driver's license, birth certificate, all paperwork, marriage certificate, everything. And they can do everything on that app. During COVID, on that app, they had to do like if someone flies in or out, they had to prove that they're home on quarantine. So they had to turn on the app and show their face and turn left and turn right and be like a monkey, doing all that to prove they're home quarantining. So they rolled it out during COVID, and now they're using it to do military stuff. So now people who live outside of the country, outside of Ukraine, can go on that app and register with military without actually traveling to Ukraine. How convenient, right? I doubt anyone would do that, though. I don't think people who escaped, who left Ukraine, would be actually, going on the app and trying to register, unless they have to like renew their passport or something like that. Because according to this new bill that was just passed today, no consular services will be provided for Ukrainian men, who don't have their military registration up to date. So if someone in Chicago has to renew their passport and they go to Ukrainian consular and they don't have everything fixed, then they will be denied services. And of course, this is for men only for now. But one of the things that is slowly building up in Ukraine is they're trying to mobilize women too. So there is this report from New York Times I saw that in Ukraine there's very little young men. I think there's twice as many 40-year-olds as there are 20-year-olds. The share of men aged like 20 to 30 is like lowest in the history of Ukraine. And people, of course, say, well, it's because of war, but no, it's even prior to the beginning of conflict. And if you think logically, when do these people were born? Like 20, 30 years old, like when they were supposed to be born, right? In 90s. And what happened in 90s in Ukraine? Like, what is distinctive feature of 90s compared to previous decades? Capitalism. You're right, Jenny Lynn. Yes, capitalism came back to Ukraine after Soviet Union collapsed, and 90s were the hardest for Ukrainians, not only Ukrainians. I mean, of course, all the post-Soviet countries. It was crazy. The economy wasn't good, and therefore, when people are struggling financially, nobody wants to have kids. Therefore, there is not so many 20 to 30-year-old men to draft and send them to front lines. So now they're thinking of drafting women. And there's right now, I think, 65,000 women already serving as volunteers. There is no law for women to be drafted except medics. So doctors, nurses, they have to register with military service, and if there is a need for some doctors somewhere at the front lines, Ukrainian women who are doctors are being sent there, unfortunately. That's what's happening. And this Ukrainian deputy, Mariana Bezuglaya, she is such an advocate for sending women to front lines. On her Telegram, she just posted not so long ago saying that she supports mobilization of women. And she said, that's our reality. And if we don't do it, we're going to lose. She said there is no two type of citizens in Ukrainian constitution. Men and women are equal. Therefore, both have to be drafted. And another lady, Oksana Grigorieva, she's the advisor on gender issues to the commander of ground forces in Ukraine. And she said that she's also, going to advocate for women to be mobilized. And if we see people like that talking about it, that means something is brewing. And also, one thing that she said that I found interesting, she said that we should try to learn from Israel. We should use Israeli model and try to do the same thing as Israel is doing. So in Israel, women also serve, and I think that's what Ukraine wants to do. Zelensky admitted before that we want to make Ukraine like a big Israel. So little by little, step by step, they're fulfilling their promises, right? One by one, they're turning into this highly controlled state, and now they also want to draft women, and it's really crazy. Let me just check the comments really quick. Yeah, Azov was formed. That's true. In After the anti-terrorist operation started, lots of these Nazi groups started forming. They started growing like mushrooms after the rain. Before, they were kind of underground, and CIA, they were training them little by little. But after the Maidan, after the coup, it was out in the open. And we know Victoria Nuland admitted how much money they had spent on training these men. NATO was out there like training. They said that Ukrainian military is their best army in Europe. So they really trained hard because they know the state. That like in what state Russian army is. So they really wanted to prepare Ukrainian army to be on the same level. And we know that right now Russia is hitting some of the infrastructure in Ukraine, like some of the power plants, right? And Ukrainians are complaining, they're saying, how come you're hitting those? Well, didn't Ukraine wanted to do decommunization, right? Well, when those power plants were built, when all infrastructure in Ukraine was built. Bridges, factories, everything was built under Soviet Union. So if Ukraine wants to part away from the Soviet Union past, they want to have nothing to do with Soviet Union. They're renaming their streets, their schools, everything is, everything gets renamed, and the language is being stripped from any Russian words, everything like that. How come they don't get rid of any of these factories that were built by Soviet Union? How come they don't want to part away with power plants? And also, I'm sure you've noticed that Russia is hitting the power plants, but they're not touching the nuclear power plants. Ukraine has a few, and one of them, of course, is Zaporizhia or Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. It's under Russian control right now, and it's being attacked. And I'm not sure if you have seen this article by Associated Press. It was so funny. They wrote an article and they said that UN is condemning Russian attacks on Zaporozhye power plant. And then that was the title, the headline. And then in the text, once you start reading the article, it says Ukrainian drones attacked the power plant. And you're like, how can such a material even come out into the press? It's the title is contradictory to the text of the article, but I think they're hoping that majority of people will not read the actual article. They will just see the headline and go on with their day thinking Russia is attacking itself. They're controlling the power plant, but they're also dropping bombs on it somehow. So yeah, this is real mental gymnastics that they're doing. It's weird, but we've seen this happening in the past 2 years, right? Russia destroyed its own pipeline. Russia destroyed its own dam. Like everything, Russia is just doing all these damages to itself. That's really crazy. But so many people believe in this, unfortunately. The next thing I want to bring up is the fact that just like Ukraine was working on a new bill and they passed it today, American Congress is also working on passing another funding bill for Ukraine. Well, it's not just for Ukraine, there's more things in there. I think it's supposed to be 95 billion, and it's an aid for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan, for all three puppet states of United States imperialism. And 60 billion of it is for Ukraine. So the most of it, right? And we know that United States has been the largest donor backing Ukraine since the beginning. I think in 2 years they've sent $113 billion in both cash and military supplies, and some of it, of course, was humanitarian aid. And right now, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, goes through like there's some drama around him. I think some Republicans. So some Republicans are on the side of Ukraine, of course. Democrats all are, but some like hardliners, like far right, they're opposing it. They're doing it for their own personal reasons. It's not like they're really concerned about Ukraine or Russia. I've listened to this interview that Tucker Carlson did with the Georgia's Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. And it's interesting how, she admits, like she realizes that, all this funding, it's going there, but it's just to prolong the war, just to make sure people keep dying on both sides. And Tucker himself also, he was criticizing Mike Johnson, saying, how come this Christian who constantly speaks of being Christian and have Christian values, but he's sponsoring a regime in Ukraine that's closing Christian churches, that's going after the priests, that's banning some fractions of Christian religion in Ukraine. And also Mike Johnson is supporting Israel, that's also killing Christians in Palestine. So some Republicans, Tucker, Marjorie Greene, they're realizing that something is wrong. They don't see the whole picture yet, but I hope they're on the right track. So Marjorie Greene, she introduced some sort of a what it's called, a motion. Yeah, in March, the end of March, before the Congress went on Easter break, she introduced a motion to push Johnson out of his position. So basically, she says he's not representing Republicans, he's siding with Democrats, and that's why she doesn't want him to be in that position. And I think it's just for a show. Some people think they really want to not have this funding passed, but I don't think so. I think it's for a show. They are pretending that they're fighting in between themselves just so we can say, oh, look, there are some good people in Congress. They really represent our interests. But behind closed doors, we all know that they agree, and no matter which party has the majority or minority in Congress, no matter from which party the president is right now, the foreign policy of United States doesn't change. Just as much as Biden is funding Ukraine, Trump was also funding Ukraine, right? He was sending them weapons and everything. So the foreign policy will be the same, imperialist policy, and Israel and Ukraine will keep getting their funding. It's not going to change because Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Greene are trying to convince the Republicans not to do so. And also, from what I understand, Republicans, they want to send the funding, but just the military funding, not the humanitarian funding. Isn't that interesting? Like, that really tells you that the military industrial complex is sponsoring each and one of them. So they like, no, just send them the military. Yeah, they need some tanks, but don't send them any aid. It's so crazy. And the Democrats, of course, are pretending that they're caring about Ukraine, and they were, for 2 years, they were showing these gruesome pictures. They were saying, oh, look, there's genocide happening in Ukraine. Putin is really trying to eliminate Ukrainians. They were, screaming for the whole world to come on the side of Ukraine. And then when the real genocide started happening in Palestine, right now, we all saw what real genocide looks like, right? Now, suddenly, all these Democrats are quiet. They're not going to talk against Israel. And if you compare what Israel is doing in Gaza and what Russia has been doing in Ukraine, it's like a day and night. Gaza is like completely destroyed. It's all in ruins. In Ukraine, people live normal life all throughout Ukraine. Just the front lines are that's really war is happening. It's actually so different from the way that Western imperialism is waging war, right? The way United States goes into Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries, they just carpet bomb. They destroy the whole city, and only then they go in with the actual military. And what Russia is doing is actually the opposite. Yes, they target some military strikes, and of course, because Ukraine is trying to intercept, there will be civilians dying. That's just unfortunate reality of war. But Russia is not intentionally targeting civilians, right? They're fighting in trenches. It's like the war of 20th century, like World War II style, right? There's soldiers on both sides in trenches, and that's how war's supposed to happen. Not by airstrikes and just destroying the whole city with all of the civilians dying. And recently, I've noticed some changes in Ukraine. First of all, in February, American embassy announced that they're moving back to Kiev, which is weird because they ran away. They evacuated in the beginning in February 2022, and now suddenly, out of nowhere, they said we're coming back. Also, major brands like Zara, H&M, and others started reopening their stores. So now in April, lots of stores are reopening in Lviv, in Kiev, and there's videos of people like big lines lining up trying to buy these fast fashion clothing. And you would think, if there is an active war, genocide happening in Ukraine, who would care about a new Zara shirt, right? Or some branded purse? So that kind of tells you that something is happening. First of all, it's not as bad as they were portraying it is, right? I have family, I have relatives in Ukraine, and they've lived just like the way we live here. They had concerts, they had weddings, they had all kinds of things happening. Versus if we look what's happening in Gaza, people are even targeted in hospitals, and people are dying by hundreds and hundreds, right? So these two conflicts are completely different, and you can't be on the side of Ukraine and on the side of Palestine at the same time, because they're not equal. Some people are, putting their Ukrainian flag and Palestinian flag in their profile, and they're thinking they're against the aggressor. But in these conflicts, for so many people, it's obvious that Israel is the aggressor, but somehow they're still thinking that Russia was the one who initiated the conflict in Ukraine. And it's not like that. Russia was trying their best to prevent this from happening. They've done so many negotiations with Ukraine. All of those 8 years between 2014 and 2022, they were going back and forward. There were so many ceasefire. I think it was 19 ceasefires broken. There were so many Minsk agreements that Ukraine was not following up with. So people in Donbass, they didn't want this war. They wanted just to live happily, live in peace, but Ukrainian government wouldn't allow them. And it's actually surprising that Russia waited so long to come and start helping and defending Donbass residents. A lot of them were expecting, and they were asking for help earlier. And I was not one of them. I didn't live in Donbass, but I do know some people personally. I know my aunt lives in Donetsk, and I've heard from her saying that she just wants peace. She doesn't care who's going to be the government, like if she's part of Ukraine or she's part of Russia. She's like, I don't care what flag we care. I just want peace. I don't want war. And unfortunately, that was not happening. She was like always calling me and other family members and saying how horrible it is. The bombings of Ukrainian military, they were destroying schools, they were destroying hospitals, and she was saying that they were living without water, without electricity for like many months because Ukraine was targeting their infrastructure. And my family from Western Ukraine, the way they were reacted to all of that, they stopped talking to her. They stopped communicating with my aunt just because she was speaking Russian, first of all. Well, she was born in Donetsk. So her mom moved there, right, from Western Ukraine. And because she was born there, she was speaking Russian because Russian was predominantly the language over there. And all of my family in the Western Ukraine, they denounced her. They said, "Oh, you're no longer part of our family. We don't want to speak to you because you support Russia. You don't want to be Ukrainian anymore." And this is the reality that many Ukrainian families had to go through. Like I know people who had families in actual Russia, and they had to they like break ties. They didn't want to speak to them. It's so sad, it's so unfortunate. And what I think about the future of this conflict is something I haven't decided yet. I didn't make my final kind of like conclusion, because every day things are happening. And at first I thought, with all these brands moving in and United States embassy moving in, I had a glimpse of hope. I thought, okay, they want to freeze this conflict, they want to put it on pause, especially because there is a Israel Palestine is happening. But with this bill about to pass in Congress, with another 60 billion for Ukraine, I don't think it's going to be put on pause, because first of all, the United States, some of that money will go back to United States, right? It's going to go funnel back to the military complex. Some of it will go into the pockets of Ukrainian politicians who are constantly um, opposing negotiations, right? They don't want to negotiate with Russia. They don't want to do diplomacy. They want the conflict to keep going on and on, because that's the way how they can enrich themselves. I think Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, I just saw some news that he became 20 times richer from in these past 2 years. So they compared his capital, his wealth from 2022 and 2024, and he became 20 times as rich as he was before. This is just crazy. And Zelensky, of course, his wife goes on a shopping spree anytime he comes to United States or he travels to Europe, and she's spending all of those money, right, that United States taxpayers are giving to Ukraine. So I think the conflict will keep on going. It may be like up and down, like slowing down a little for summer probably, even though I'm sure they will come up with some counteroffensive, because they usually say, oh, we'll have a spring counteroffensive or summer counteroffensive, but somehow they always fail. But usually in those areas, right, the bigger fighting happens in winter. So I assume that right now for summer we're gonna see some slowing down, and then come fall and come winter, I think it'll get worse again, unfortunately. But of course, I'm not a prophet. I don't know exactly what will be happening. I'll keep on my eye on Ukrainian news and, of course, American news as well. And I'll be making posts and translating the Ukrainian news for you guys. So make sure you follow all of our social media. The Revolution Report is on Telegram. We're on Twitter. We are on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Vero. And of course, we have a channel on YouTube, and we also make posts, which are news-related posts, on the community page that is on YouTube. So YouTube is not just for videos. There's also a community page that we treat as like a social media, right? We just post every 2 hours. We make a new post. So make sure you follow us on the social media platform that you are. Also visit our website, TheRevolutionReport.org. We publish new articles every day, so please support us there. And we have a Patreon page, so we rely on donations from our viewers. And if you can, please become our Patreon, because we're not sponsored by Kremlin, as some of these Twitter trolls were saying. We are not getting checks written by Mr. Putin. We have to rely on our own day jobs to support ourselves, and also on donations. Thank you so much for joining today. This was my first time, and I was like really nervous, but I think it went well. I am happy that you were able to join me, and I see a lot of action in the chat. I will make sure to, after the stream, to go and read all of your comments. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye.